Welcome to the Virginia is for Laughers podcast, brought to you by X2 Comedy. If you're looking to get more out of your Shenandoah Valley experience, then this is the podcast for you. You'll meet interesting people, the comedians that perform here, and find out more about what you can do and see. Whether you live here or plan to visit, listen to explore what helps make up our unique slice of heaven. Now here's your host, Dawn Davis Womack.
Hello, Laughers. I'm thrilled to introduce you to Joanne Gabbin, a professor of English at James Madison University and the executive director of the Furious Flower Poetry Center, the nation's first academic center for Black poetry. She is the author of Sterling A. Brown, Building the Black Aesthetic Tradition, and has authored a children's book, I Bet She Called Me Sugar Plum. Joanne is the editor of Furious Flower, African American Poetry from the Black Arts Movement to the present, the Furious Flowering of African American Poetry, and the executive producer of the Furious Flower video and DVD series. She is also the founder and organizer of the Winter Green Women Writers Collective. A dedicated teacher and scholar, Dr. Gabbin has received numerous awards for excellence in teaching and scholarship. Among the most recent were JMU Alumni Distinguished Faculty Award, the Provost Award for Distinguished Service, and from JMU Office of Sponsored Programs, a Lifetime Achievement Award. Dr. Gabbin has also been inducted into the International Literary Hall of Fame for writers of African descent. Welcome to the show, Joanne. It's great to have you on today.
Thank you, Dawn. It's wonderful to be here.
Yes, it is. See that you got so much going on. I got tripped up there for a second.
There's a lot going on, believe me.
There is. It has truly been a blessing to have you in my life and to learn from you. You're just an incredible woman, and I can't wait to share with the Laughers a little bit more about you because your story is tremendous. So this is going to be a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know the answer to this question, so I had to start with this. I mean, I know a lot about you, but I don't know this one. When did you first know you had a gift for writing poetry?
Well, I'm not sure that I learned that early on in life. I know that I loved reading. I loved reading, and I especially loved reading the fairy tales and the children's nursery books. And my mother was my first teacher. And of course, she had a fourth grade education. So by the time I got to the second grade, she said to me, Joanne, I've taken you as far as I can take you. Now you have to go further. And so that inspired in me this desire just to read as many books as I can get my hands on. In fact, when I was maybe 8, the Ena Pratt Public Library had a reading contest in the summer. And I decided I was going to compete in that reading contest. And I read over the next 6 weeks, 273 books.
Whoa.
And I knew these were children's books, so they were little ones.
Okay.
But I knew that I had won. And then I got the notice that someone else had read more books than I. And I said, I don't know how that's possible, but it started me on my journey of just loving to read. And poetry came into play more when I was in college. And I read the poems of Langston Hughes and Paul Laurence Dunbar and Margaret Walker. So by the time I got to graduate school and could study these poets, I really got to know that I wanted to teach the work of these poets and also Black literature in general.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. It's your mom must be so proud of how far you've gotten. She come to your events and she's your biggest fan probably, right?
Well, she certainly would have been, but unfortunately my mother passed away when she was just 56 years old. So I was 24. So most of my adult life, I have been without my mother. But in the universe, I can feel her presence. I know that she's very proud of me. She saw me achieve 2 degrees, my Bachelor of Arts degree from Morgan State College at that time, now university, and my master's degree from the University of Chicago. So she didn't get to see me get my PhD. She certainly didn't get to see me in my teaching career. And I regret that because I know she would have loved the way that students respond to me as a teacher and as also a mentor. I think she would have been just blown away by the fact that James Madison University named a building after me and my husband.
I know, that was great.
She probably would have said, oh, no way. This little Black girl from the east side of Baltimore. So, but I know every day I think of my mother, and every day I think of the start that she gave me in this world of literature.
Yeah. I know she would be. And I didn't plan this question, but we do need to talk about that. You got a building, you and your husband, named after you on James Madison University's campus. And that was kind of recent, wasn't it? Can you talk about that? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it was in February that the Board of Visitors unanimously approved the renaming of 3 buildings on campus. And they were named for African Americans. And one building was named for Doris Harper Allen and also Robert Watkins Lee. That was a dormitory. Another building was named for Sherry Darkis Johnson. Dr. Darkis Johnson, in fact, just a little while ago, gave the commencement speech at James Madison. And then the other building was named for me and my husband. So, and now it's called Gabbin Hall. And it's on, all these buildings are on the quad.
Oh, that's wonderful. What did it feel like to walk past it and see your name up there? Do you just stand in awe sometimes? It
was out of body. The first time I walked past the building and I looked at the sign and it said Gabbin Hall. And I said, this is unbelievable. This kind of honor is usually given to someone who has passed away, or at least someone who is retired. But my husband and I were honored with this. We're still working at JMU. We certainly, I hope, are a little ways from being vertical,
Me too. Amen to that.
I hope we have a little more time being vertical. That's what I meant. Ways from being horizontal.
I know what you meant.
Yes. So, but I'm thinking that what an honor, that faculty, alumni, the Board of Visitors, the president, senior leadership, and most importantly, my students and the community felt that we deserved this honor. And it was given to us at this time so we could really enjoy it.
Yes, that's great. Your husband is a professor also, right, at JMU?
Yes, he is. He's professor of accounting. In fact, he's the director of the School of Accounting at James Madison University.
That's fantastic.
And we've been doing this, Dawn, for 36 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
You've seen a few things.
Teaching and doing administrative work for all of this time. My husband used to be the director of the School of Accounting maybe 20 years ago. And then the faculty in the accounting School of Accounting talked him into doing it one more time. So he will probably finish out his career as director of the School of Accounting.
Wow. That's incredible. 36 years. You've probably seen a few changes in 36 years, I would imagine.
Many changes. In fact, I look at the campus and really understand that the campus has almost doubled in size since we've been here.
Yeah.
It was not an east side of the campus when we came.
Right.
And now we have all of those buildings over there, including the Rhodes Library, and now this huge Atlantic Union Bank Center. So the the topography is totally different.
Yeah, they got rid of the cows up there on East
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I have to know, so you read a lot when you were young and you went to college. Did you know going into college, I'm going to be an English major. I'm going to be an English professor. Is that you went into college with that thought?
It's so interesting. I wish I could say that I had many, many options. But at the time I went to school in the early 1960s, I entered Morgan in 1963. There were very few professions that Black women really were introduced to. Nursing, secretarial work, teaching, sometimes the ministry, and all of the professions, lawyers, doctors, especially in our segregated Black communities. Mm. I say to this day, because I love seeing buildings go up, that if I had known more about architecture, I probably would have become an architect because I love building things. And so somehow that has manifested in my building programs. I'm a builder. I love to see things start and develop and see them grow in such a way where you can look back and you can say, that is a magnificent structure. So when I went into Morgan, I thought, okay, I love reading. I'm going to be an English teacher and I'm going to help children in high school learn how to enjoy literature. So that was my goal. But also I knew, based upon my interest in high school, that I wanted to be a writer and I wanted to write in a journalistic way. In my particular high school in East Baltimore, it was called Eastern High School, newly integrated. The Quill and Scroll Club was very cliquish, so I couldn't become a member of that. The newspaper was very cliquish, so I wasn't invited to join that. But when I got to Morgan, a historically Black school, I said, I'm not going to let anything get in the way of developing those skills that I want. So right away, I joined the newspaper, the student newspaper, which was at that time called, it still is called, The Spokesman. And in my first semester, I was doing stories about integration and integration of the mall around the university. And then the very second year, I was the editor of the features department in the newspaper. And then at the end of that year, I became the editor-in-chief. So I was editor of the newspaper almost my entire college career. And then my final year, I was editor of the yearbook. So my mentor at that particular time saw my interest in journalism. And right away, she offered me a job in her father's newspaper, the Afro-American, which was one of the first newspapers for Blacks in Baltimore. So I started my career as a journalist, and then later on went back to my former desire to become a teacher, but I never became a high school teacher. I always taught at the college level. Yeah. So that's how it happened.
That's amazing. See, I'm learning so much more about you today. This is beautiful. I'm loving it. And when you started at JMU, you started in the honors program there.
Well,
no?
Yeah, not exactly. Okay. I started as a professor in the English department. And I was the first professor, Black professor, hired in that department. And my goal was to build the African American literature program. And so I taught courses in African American literature, built the curriculum, and that was my job for the first year. However, soon, before my first year was over, the acting president, then Russ Warren, tapped me to be the director of the honors program. What it was, my students were so delighted with my teaching, especially in my world literature class and also in my African American survey classes, that they got the word to the dean of the College of Letters, Arts and Sciences, it was called then, and also to Russ Warren, that here's a person who really should be in charge of some of the best and the brightest students at JMU. So that's how I was offered that position to be director of the honors program. And I was reluctant, Dawn. I had come there to teach courses in literature. And so the acting president, Dr. Warren, said, well, we want you for this particular job. But if you take it, you have to take it for at least 3 years. I wanted to do it for 2. And, and so
squeezing
okay.
another year out of you there.
Yeah. And then he said, and if you take this job, you should just teach 1 course. And I wanted to teach 2 because teaching was my love. But that was a very wise man, because that's what I could have done, only 1 course. And once I taught, and once I directed the program for 2 years, I wouldn't have had the program that I wanted in place. So I went on for 3 years, and then 5, and then 10, and then 19. So I grew the program from a program with maybe 50 or 60 students in it to a program that had almost 600 students by the time I left. And I only left to go to my first love, which was poetry, and which was establishing the Furious Flower Poetry Center. So I knew that someone else could direct the honors program. Someone else could take it from a program to a honors college. It was at honors college range by the time I left it, but it took another 5 or so years before it became an honors college. Yes.
That's really, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I loved that work because I loved dealing with students who took risks in their education, who wanted to do more, not less. I loved having programs. Every week I did a brown bag lecture series program. Every Wednesday we had a student or faculty member or a guest from off campus to come and talk about a special interest. And so I not only educated the honor students, but the faculty and other students would come and be a part of these programs. So I felt that I was really raising the intellectual level of all of the people on campus, those who wanted to participate. And out of that, in fact, if I hadn't been director of the honors program, there would have never been a Furious Flower Poetry Center, because I saw that these students were hungry for diverse learning. They were hungry to hear from poets like Maya Angelou and Nikki Giovanni and Sonia Sanchez and scholars like Trudia Harris and Daryl Dance and Henry Louis Gates. And I brought all of these people to James Madison University even before I did the first conference called Furious Flower.
That's incredible. That is a lot to have accomplished in those 19 years, and certainly has to have made such a great impact on so many students, obviously. And you've mentioned some of the highlights. What would you say you're most proud of during that 19 years? You've mentioned some things. What would you say you're most proud of?
There are two things.
Okay.
I think I'm very, very proud of the fact that during that particular period, I must have seen more than 900 honors theses that were completed and that were bound and that were put in the library and also the honors building, which is now Hillcrest. That was something I also wanted to achieve. I wanted a place that honors would reside, and it now it's now in that entire building, Hillcrest Hall. But I think the second thing is that I encourage students to do their best, even students who didn't complete the honors program and didn't graduate with distinction. And I have to mention my friend, Sean Tobin. Sean Tobin, a wonderful young man in the early 1990s, was an honor student, but he didn't have the GPA that would have allowed him to graduate as an honors student and graduate with distinction. So I called him into my office and I said, Sean, you're far away from a 3.25 GPA. And I would really suggest that you just drop out of the program and you concentrate on your business degree, getting that business degree, because you have such wonderful personality, charisma. You're going to do really well in business. And, he then years later called me. Well, he really sent me an email and he said, I'm the one that you kicked out of the honors program. And my daughter is so excited about learning the poetry of Maya Angelou and reciting it. And he said, do you by chance know the poetry of Maya Angelou? And I said, yes, I think I do. and so he comes back maybe a year later, and he and his wife, Michelle, established the first professorship in the Honors College in my name, the Dr. Joanne V. Gabbin professorship in the Honors College. And so he did very well as a businessman.
One way or another, he was going to be in that honors college.
Yes. So he, instead of putting his name there, he put mine. He said that I was one who saw him, who really saw his skills and his talents, and I encouraged him. He said, no one, probably except his mother, has encouraged him as much as I have. So that to me is probably one of the proudest things that happened, because I know that Sean Tobin represents just one of many, many students who were helped by being a part of the honors program.
Yes. You are a positive impact on any student who is blessed to cross your path. And I even had the fortunate blessing to experience some of that, because when I worked at JMU, I took one of your life writing classes, which, again, so amazing. You're an incredible teacher. Can you share with the Laughers more about that class and how you structure it?
Well, I love that class. And I thought, what better way to get students into writing about themselves than to have them read the autobiographies of great Black writers. So, I think I remember in your class, I opened with Maya Angelou.
Yes.
I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings.
Yep.
And I think we did James McBride and Jasmine Ward and Richard Wright. I think if you want to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. And so I wanted those authors to inspire my students in my life writing class to read with such depth that they understood what things were important to write about. One of the first assignments in that class is to write about an ancestor. Mm-hmm. And I know if students were like myself when I was that age, you're so concentrated on being young and exploring new things that you don't look back to get information from those who could give you wisdom, who are right around. And I remember having the opportunity to visit with my grandfather, but I was so busy trying to see the next dance craze, or so busy trying to talk with my boyfriend that I didn't sit down and talk with him about his life. And I realized when he was gone that I had missed such a great opportunity. So I thought, this is one service that I could give my students, that I could give them an assignment that would allow them to go back and talk with an elderly person in their family. And not mother, father, because too close to them, but an aunt or a grandfather or grandmother or even a godmother to tell something about the life that they lived, and they would gain wisdom from that. So that was the first assignment. And then the others often revolved around a traumatic event, something that galvanized the attention of the entire nation, the entire world, because that would place the students in a time, in a space where others would also inhabit that time and space. I know for me, it was, I was a 60s child, you know. I was the child of the assassinations. I remember the assassination of John Kennedy, of Malcolm X, of Martin Luther King, of Medgar Evers. I mean, those deaths really influenced so much of who I became. So to this day, I call myself, Dawn, a literary activist. The only way I can feel that I deserve space in the world is to be actively involved in social justice, actively involved in making the world more accepting, and people in the world more accepting of each other, of teaching the gospel of love. And that's what I do in my classes, through the work that I do with Furious Flower. I love poets because I think poets have their hands on the prize. They know what it means to be human. They know how to express it. They know that very little separates us. So many things connect us. And if you really, really understand the value of poetry, you know that it teaches us how to be more in touch with our humanity. So that's why I've spent really most of my life being concerned about supporting poets who will then support us.
I love what you just said there, the gospel of love. That's really impactful because that is exactly how we connect to each other in our humanity. It's through love and compassion, grace and understanding. That's now you're going to get me all teary-eyed over here. You are a literary activist. I was reading up a little bit on the book you wrote, Sterling A. Brown, Building the Black Aesthetic Tradition. And I hadn't ever heard of this man before in my life. So I think it would be wonderful if you could share a little bit about him with our laughers. Who was Sterling A. Brown?
In fact, the laughers would have loved Sterling Brown. Sterling Brown was one of those liars, if you will. Tall tale teller. He was a professor at Howard University for 40 years. He was professor there from 1929 until 1969 straight. And then he came back in 1970 as a professor emeritus there. Sterling Brown, he was a poet, an essayist, a critic. He was also the leader of the Federal Writers Project in Washington, D.C., as a part of the Works Progress administration during the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I'll tell you how I came to him. My mother passed away, as I said, very early, and she was 56, and she passed in 1970. I had just finished my master's degree, and the University of Chicago faculty asked me to stay on and do the PhD. And of course, I hadn't planned to do that. I had planned to start teaching in the high school, but I decided to do it. And I did. Once I got back after my mother's passing, I was reading work by Langston Hughes and Sterling Brown and Gwendolyn Brooks. In fact, my mentor, George Kent, wanted me to write my dissertation on Gwendolyn Brooks. So he was planting the seed early for me to start doing some research on her. But I lived in Chicago. I knew Gwendolyn Brooks. I met Gwendolyn Brooks through Hakeem Matabuti and through Hoyt Fuller. And I was afraid that because I was too close to her, that I wouldn't be able to do her justice. But this one thing happened. It was sort of divine. I was reading a poem by Sterling Brown called Sister Lou. And in this particular poem, there's a persona, a woman who is at the bedside of a very, very good friend who is dying. Mm-hmm. And she is, through her words, describing heaven. And she tells her friend to go on up to heaven and talk to David for a moment, Box Plunkin' David, and tell Mary how to make your green grape jellies. And, she was making heaven, if you will, very familiar, putting heaven in heavenly terms that this woman who needed to be comforted to help in this transition. And I had just had that experience with my mother's passing. And we have this expression, I suppose it's a gospel song. There's a telephone in my bosom. I want to call him up. And I would sit in the middle of my floor sometimes and just wish that I could have a telephone in my bosom to call up my mother. But that wasn't possible. But Sterling Brown, through Sister Lou, had made me feel such a connection to this woman that I said, any man who can make me feel better in this grieving process is someone I should look into. So I made an appointment to go to see him in Washington, D.C., and I met him and his wife and Daisy Brown. And I spent the most incredible afternoon hearing him read his poetry, talk about the Odyssey of Big Boy, talk about Revelations, talk about Sister Lou, a wonderful woman from the Blue Ridge Mountains called Miss Bibby. Talk about Big Boy Davis, a blues singer. And I knew when I got back to Chicago that I would have to write my dissertation on Sterling Brown. Others had written on Langston Hughes. Others had written on Gwendolyn Brooks, but no one had written on Sterling Brown. And so he was so popular at Howard University that the students in the 1960s, around 1968, 69, wanted to change the name of Howard University to Sterling Brown University.
Oh,
Because,
wow.
yeah, he was an amazing storyteller. He told me so much about Paul Robeson, Josephine Baker, icons that I just read about, but he knew. And of course, he knew the major poets. He knew Langston Hughes. He knew Melvin Tolson and many, many others. So it was a journey. He became a very, very important figure in my life. And I was so happy when I completed that dissertation. And then shortly after that, published the book. I published it in 1985. And one of the proudest moments of my academic career was taking that book to him and handing it to him. And he said a very curious thing to me when I was handing him the book. He said, "Well, Joanne, am I in it?" And I said,
Yeah.
"Are you in it?"
Yeah.
I said, "Well, it's about you." And then I realized what he was saying. He was saying, "Have you captured my spirit in this book?" And he made me ponder. And if I had it to do all over again, I probably could do a better book, because now I understand that not only what he talked about in terms of literature, what he wrote, but who he was so magnificent that I probably would have written more about his life. But this was a dissertation, and I was covering his criticism, his poetry, and his life, and I could only do so much. And I knew that it was going to be a seed piece. But to this day, Dawn, there is not another long critical biography on Sterling Brown. Mine is still the one that stands.
That's beautiful. And you might have found your second book. I'm just going to put that out there. That could be a sequel. And
that could be. That could be.
That could be. Food for thought.
Yes.
You have had a tremendous amount of amazing, famous poets come through your programs and events. And you've mentioned some of them already in this podcast episode. And you know them personally as well, which is rich and beautiful. One of them is Maya Angelou. You've talked about her. She's an amazing woman, and I read some of her work because it was required in class, but I'm glad that it was. I'm glad it was. That is my favorite of hers. I know why the cage bird sings. How did you meet Maya, and what are some of your fondest memories of her?
Well, I met her many years before she became a friend. I met her because I was determined to get my students in connection with her. So we would go to her readings, and I would take the students backstage and to meet her. And she was always so gracious. But I really became friendly with her towards the last years of her life. In 1994, she came to James Madison University in March, I remember. And I was able to talk with her about perhaps having her edit some of my students' writing. And I sent her all of these essays by my students. And of course, she said, "Well, Joanne, I really don't know whether I can do this." But she says, "I'll take a look at some of them." And she did. And she wrote back to a couple of the students. But we really got to know her, at least I got to know her better in 2010, when we did a program for Lucille Clifton. Lucille Clifton passed in 2009. And Maya Angelou said to me and Nikki Giovanni, "Well, why wasn't I included in the memorial for Lucille Clifton?" And of course, at that particular time, Maya was already starting to fail a little bit. She had some real health issues. But we decided that we would do a tribute to Toni Morrison, a living writer, because Nikki Giovanni and I both agreed that the only thing that wasn't great about Lucille Clifton's memorial was that Lucille Clifton wasn't there. Mm. It was one of the most phenomenal programs I've ever put together. We called it 73 Poems for 73 Years, honoring the life and legacy of Lucille Clifton. It makes me emotional sometimes, even when I think about it. So after that, Nikki and I decided that we would embrace Maya Angelou, and all three of us would do a tribute to Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison, the Nobel laureate in poetry, known around the world as just the most outstanding writer of our time. And so we decided to do this tribute. It was called Sheer Good Fortune. And because we knew it was going to draw so many people, and there wasn't a venue at JMU that would hold that many people, we had it at Virginia Tech in 2012. And we drew more than 6,000 people, 5,000 in one venue and another 1,000 in another venue, seeing it remotely. And we had more than 40 artists and poets come to read portions of Toni Morrison's work. It was spectacular. So we have those videos available for people who might want to see that program. It's outstanding. We were able to attract Angela Davis, Rita Dove, Mari Evans, Jericho Brown. Sonia Sanchez. We were able to attract singers and playwrights, everyone to that particular honoring. And Toni Morrison said at the end, she said, if nothing of this manner ever happens to me again, this is enough. Mm-hmm. And can you imagine being there on stage and hearing this woman say that and know that you have something to do with it? And so Furious Flower gave Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou Lifetime Achievement Awards at that particular program. Spectacular. I still don't know how we pulled it off, but we did.
I was there, so I could testify that you did.
You weren't there.
Yes, I was there. My husband and I went to that. Yeah, I remember.
Wonderful.
It was really
Wonderful.
Great. Yes, that's really wonderful when you can get a tribute like that while you're living.
While you're living.
Yeah,
yes.
That's beautiful.
And so Maya Angelou passed away a year later. Mm-hmm. And then Toni Morrison passed away 7 years later. Mm. So we were able to honor those women, those international icons, when they could really smell the roses and enjoy them. Yeah.
Yes. I'm glad you did that too. Yeah, I'm glad you did that. I have a question about the naming of your poetry center. It's always intrigued me. And maybe it makes all the sense in the world to poets out there, but I'm not one. And I can't be the only one who's curious about why Furious Flower. So why is it named that?
Oh, that's a question I get all the time. And it's a wonderful story. As I said, I met Gwendolyn Brooks in Chicago when I was in graduate school there, 1969. And Gwendolyn Brooks became a really important person to me. She became like a mentor mother to me. And my first job was at Roosevelt University. And shortly after I started teaching there, a colleague saw me in the faculty lounge and said, "You're that woman teaching that course in revolutionary Black poetry, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, we almost got Gwendolyn Brooks to teach a course here." And I said, "Oh my, that would have been fabulous. I'm so sorry you didn't get her to come." And he said, "Well, it wasn't like that. The faculty didn't choose her to come." And I couldn't believe it. The faculty turned Gwendolyn Brooks down. And the faculty did that because she didn't have the credentials that they expected of a creative writing professor. So she didn't have an MFA. She didn't have a PhD, but she was also what? The 1950 Pulitzer Prize winner, the first African-American to ever win that prize. And the short-sightedness of Roosevelt University to deny this woman an opportunity to teach. So I made up my mind that every place I taught, I would bring Gwendolyn Brooks. And so when I taught at Chicago State, I brought her as a speaker. When I taught at Lincoln University, she was the very first person to speak during my tenure at Lincoln University in 1977. And then when I started teaching at James Madison University in 1985, the very next year, 1986, she came for the first time to James Madison University. So in 1993, when she came to the area, she went to Piedmont Community College to speak there. I put my students, I am an activist. I put my students on a bus and I took them over to Piedmont Community College because I said, Gwendolyn Brooks can't get this close and you not see her. So they saw her. They heard her read, and afterwards they stood in line for about an hour and a half, and she personally signed every book, personally talked to every student. And the next day when I went to class, they said, could we possibly have her back at James Madison University? So I called her just before she got on the train to ride back to Chicago, and I said, Gwen, would you come to a JMU to speak again? And she said, well, Joanne, I'll come, but not this year. I'll come next year. And so I had a whole year to plan her reading at James Madison University. The word got out, and Sonia Sanchez says, well, I want to be there. I'd love to read with her. And Nikki Giovanni said the same thing, and Hakeem Adabuti said the same thing. And after a while, we had a list of people who wanted to be there to honor Gwendolyn Brooks. And as it turns out, it became more than the Gwendolyn Brooks poetry reading. It was a conference surrounding and honoring this woman who had influenced so profusely the last 50 years of literature. And so instead of calling it the Gwendolyn Brooks Conference, because there'd already been a Gwendolyn Brooks Conference at Chicago State, I looked around for a phrase that would capture her and this period that she influenced so deeply. And I ran across the lines. The time cracks into furious flower, lifts its face all unashamed, and sways in wicked grace. And I said, Furious Flower. We're going to call this conference Furious Flower. And it was a happy accident because I think people not only came to that conference to honor Gwendolyn Brooks, they came to figure out what I was going to do with this oxymoron called Furious Flower, And I always say it's about the rage and it's about the beauty.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's so good. Oh,
so in 1994, in September, she came along with 35 other poets, read to audiences that these poets had never seen. They read to audiences of 1,300 people at every reading. And we had readings around the clock from Thursday night until Saturday evening. Every reading, there were more than 1,000 people. So it went down in history as the most amazing conference, the most amazing gathering of poets ever in our century.
That's really great. And now we have a poetry center named the Furious Flower.
That's right. And the Poetry Center opened in 2005. It was after the second Furious Flower Conference in 2004, when then President Linwood Rose said, that conference was so spectacular. Do you think you'd like to have a center? And I said, yes, that would be wonderful. And I knew once I said that, I would have to give up my first child. And that was the honors program.
Yeah.
But I was happy to do that because I knew that only I could, at that particular point, run that center. And so that's how it happened. And since that center started, we've been doing wonderful programming for all ages. Our first program started with a children's poetry camp for children between the ages of 7 and 14. And every year since 2005, we've had the children's poetry camp. We now call it the Children's Creativity Camp because we do so much around poetry, including art and music and dance and performance, that we now expand the notion of that camp to creativity. Yeah, so it's wonderful.
Maybe include comedy in the future. Wink, wink.
Well, you know what? It already has it.
Okay, good.
Because we have open mic.
Oh, good.
It's the most popular part of the Children's Creativity Camp. And children get up there. If they don't read a poem, they sometimes want to tell a joke.
That's
or they
great.
will play an instrument. But they do tell the jokes, and sometimes they're really wonky.
I might have to come see that, support that for sure. That's great. Yeah, you've got a great mission there. You want to cultivate an appreciation for poetry among students, like you said, all levels. And beyond that, you want to promote Black poets at all stages of their careers. And right now, currently at your Poetry Center, you are taking submissions for the 2022 Furious Flower Poetry Prize, where the winning poet receives $1,000. When is the deadline, and can you share with the Laughers more details?
Absolutely. We are opening that up in just a few days. The deadline is February the 15th. And we ask that you go online to go to our website, www.jmu.edu/Furious Flower, and go to the Poetry Prize item there. And it is, it's open. We want you to send at least 3 poems. And we also will give a runner-up prize of $500. And both poets, honorable mention and the winner, are invited to read at JMU, and we give them an honoraria for reading at JMU. So it's a really lucrative prize.
Yes.
And we ask only that they register and send in their poems. And I think the registration is just $15.
Yeah, that's what I read. That's correct. Yeah.
Yes.
That's really awesome. Well, I could talk to you all day, Joanne, and I know you've got, you're headed out. We're recording this in December, so you've got some holiday plans, and we want to be able to support you on that. So as we wrap up here, can you share with the Laughers how they can follow the Furious Flower Poetry Center happenings on social media or otherwise?
Yes, come to our website. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Of course, at the website, we have all of those ways to be in touch with us. Come and visit us, those who are local, at the Furious Flower Poetry Center on Cardinal Drive. We still welcome visitors who wear masks.
Those are the times, yeah.
Those are the times, yes. But I said earlier the website address, but I'll repeat it: www.jmu.edu/Furious Flower. And you will find not only information about the Poetry Prize, but also information about our upcoming readers who will be visiting the campus. And we have a Collegiate Summit that will happen on March 3rd through the 4th, 2022. College students out there who want to be a part of that, it'll be virtual, it's free, it's going to be amazing. We are featuring Amber McBride and also Douglas Kearney, and both of them were National Book Award finalists. So amazing poets who are going to be working with our students, talking with them about how poetry transports us.
That's beautiful too. I think I've said beautiful the most on this podcast episode.
We do beautiful things here.
That's right, you do. And I'm going to tell you, laughers, if Joanne Gabbin is behind organizing the event, then you must go, because it is an experience. So we will be sure to put that information about the summit and about the 2022 Furious Flower Poetry Prize in the show notes for you as well. And thank you so much, Joanne. It truly is an honor, a gift, and a blessing to be in your presence. Always. It's been enjoyable. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dawn. It's wonderful to be here.
Yes. And laughers, if you or someone you know is an emerging writer eligible to submit to the 2022 Furious Flower Poetry Prize, share this podcast episode with them. And again, visit jmu.edu/Furious Flower/Poetry Prize. That's jmu.edu/Furious Flower/Poetry Prize. Furious is spelled Furious. If you are driving, working out, or simply can't find a pen right now, no problem. We'll be sure to put that website information in the show notes for you also. And lastly, and most importantly, thanks for tuning in, laughers. Out of all the podcasts out there, you picked us, and we think that's pretty darn special, just like you. Until next time, keep smiling. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Virginia is for Laughers podcast, brought to you by X2 Comedy. We'll be dropping a new podcast every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so check back for another uplifting episode. Come to an X2 Comedy show or let us bring a show to you. To find out more, head to x2comedy.com. Be sure to share us with a friend. Until next time, cheers.